See folks joining us, so we'll get started in a little bit. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I think, that we all have a lot of things that we're feeling right now, and I'm so happy and excited to have everyone in this space. I want to start by introducing myself and my co-moderator, David Knight, and then I'll share some remarks. My name is Jordy Davies. I am a PhD candidate in the political science department at the University of Chicago. I study social movements, Black politics, particularly Black Lives Matter. And I am committed to writing about Black liberation and Black feminism. I also want to introduce my amazing friend and colleague, David Knight, who is a teacher, organizer, also a PhD candidate in the political science department at the University of Chicago, studying the prison industrial complex and young people and prison abolition. So thank you again, all of you, for joining us this afternoon. We think it is safe to say that we are collectively devastated by recent events and are trying to make sense of the world right now and struggle for a way forward in pursuit of justice. We want to begin by uplifting the names of Adam Toledo and Daunte Wright, as well as the name of Micaiah Bryant, a 15-year-old girl who was killed by police in Columbus, Ohio, just after Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all 3 counts for the murder of George Floyd just yesterday. Micaiah's murder makes clear that any notion of carceral justice is unreliable and short-lived. So we want to establish this space as one that is open to primarily life-affirming institutions for all Black people, and especially for Black and brown children. And that is divested from policing and prisons. We are grateful to be in conversation with all of you and with our panelists today. We want to thank the co-sponsors of this event, which include the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture, the Posen Center for Human Rights Lab, the Office of Multicultural Students Affairs, and the Center for Identity and Inclusion, and the University Community Service Center and the Black Graduate Coalition at UChicago, all organizations creating space for folks to have these important conversations. So David and I will start the conversation and open up the chat for you all to place your comments and questions throughout. Please feel free to use the chat as a community building space. And we will have a Q&A towards the end. Around 3:40, we'll begin Q&A and start to kind of look at the chat for your questions. And we will, like I said, begin that around 3:40. And today we are deeply grateful to be joined by 4 amazing organizers here in Chicago, including Alicia Hurtado, Jacqueline Jax Hamilton, Stefan Cuevas, Kai Zaguano, and Tina Reynolds Tyler, who David will briefly introduce now. I'm sorry if I've messed up anyone's names.
Yes, thank you so much. I am, and we are so honored to be joined by such an amazing panel of people who've been doing amazing work in Chicago. So we're joined by Alicia Hurtado, who is a 3rd year undergraduate student in the college at the University of Chicago and who is studying sociology and comparative race and ethnic studies. Alicia is a student organizer with Care Not Cops. Jacqueline Jax Hamilton is the Director of Wellness, Culture, and Action at the Chicago Freedom School, where she holds and implements the Healing Justice Net framework. In addition to being a healing justice practitioner, Jax is a creator of the hashtag Civically Engaged, Electoral Politics for Everyday People, and a founding member of Ujima Medics, a Black community medic collective that offers first responder training for gunshot wounds and asthma attacks. Stefan Cuevas Quezagueno is a trans queer Latinx organizer with the Chicago Freedom School. The center of their work is police abolition and trans liberation through action and education. And last but certainly not least, Trina Reynolds Tyler is a data analyst and at the Invisible Institute. She co-founded the Chicago chapter of Data for Black Lives and is an organizer with UIP 100 and the Black Abolitionist Network. Before receiving her Master's of Public Policy from the University of Chicago, she worked closely with the Citizens Police Data Project and the Youth Police Project. So we will start, and thank you so much. I'm so excited to be learning about each of you and each of your work. So we will start by going around and hearing from each of you. So please feel free to introduce yourself further and share your brief remarks. So we ask that your remarks run about 5 to 7 minutes each, which can include reactions to recent tragedies, and additionally, additional context for how you view police violence and the role of youth organizing, or questions, alternative frameworks for thinking about the current moment and for imagining justice for Adam Toledo, Daunte Wright, and Micaiah Bryant. Jordy and I will then ask you to reflect on some additional questions inspired by your remarks that address the themes of this event, and then we'll open it up with questions to the audience. So Stefan, would you be open to beginning? Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to be here and speak about my experiences. My name is Stefan Cuevas Caizaguano. As my bio stated, I'm trans and queer, and I'm also a resident of Little Village. I actually live a block away from where Adam Toledo was murdered by the police. And every day I have to walk past the mural, the candles, the flowers, and I have to think that this is not where my work begins, but where it continues, because we cannot continue to live like this, where police just come into our communities and kill our young people. Folks have been demanding the abolition of police since their shady origins. Specifically, Black folks, Black women, Black queer and trans women are often the ones most harmed by them, and most of the time are the ones have to carry the brunt of the labor and fighting for the rights of all marginalized communities. I could not be here today without Marsha P. Johnson. I could not be here today without Ella Baker. And I could not be here today without Miriam Kaba. I want to honor these women and give them credit for any work that I do in my own community, because without them, I would not be able to continue their legacy. In my years of organizing against state violence, the only things that have changed up until now are the names. Mike Brown, Troy Davis, Rakia Boyd, Sandra Bland, Laquan McDonald, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Mark Navarez, Daunte Wright, Adam Toledo, and Micaiah Bryant. These are the only things that have changed, and the police do not want to listen. There's too many names to count, and there are too many to grieve. There are many on the names that I have listed that have not received justice. Police have never been for the community when they have taken so many from us. Reform has never been an option. Reform has continually been a conversation that has not worked for decades. Waiting any longer is lethal, because any moment longer, we lose another member of our community to state and police violence. Police need to be defunded, because despite the millions they receive each year, it does not stop them from killing children in our community. The billions of dollars they receive does not give them empathy. It does not prevent them from killing a 13-year-old boy with his hands up. On April 16th, in 2021, during the Logan Square demonstration, I was actually one of the organizers who led thousands of people to fight in solidarity with the Little Village community, along with 15 other young femme, queer, and trans Latinx individuals from Little Village as well. As we see, young femme and queer folks are always the ones doing the work. We knew that we needed to leave our community, because doing any work in Little Village is not going to draw attention. We need to disrupt white folks. We need to disrupt white supremacy. So we knew Logan Square would be perfect. We intended to keep it a green event because we had invited families who had been harmed and who had lost their loved ones due to police violence. We allowed them to speak. We allowed them to hold space with us to show that we were there to love and support them, and we would not subject them to any more police violence. However, the police had other plans. They had used signal blockers to make sure that we weren't communicating with each other, to make sure that we were lost, to make sure things were hectic and chaotic and people were scared. And they kettled us so that they would separate us into smaller groups, and it was easier for us to be confused and for them to arrest us. On our way home to try to get everyone back into their cars, they met us with riot gear and came after us when all we wanted to do was go home. So when I say there is no such thing as police reform, they are not capable of it. They are not capable of changing. When there is peace, they want to create violence and chaos, and they want to destroy our communities that we try to uplift so much. So there is no amount of money that will get the police to stop killing us. There is no number. We need police abolition, and we need to invest in Black and Brown communities to fund food security, mental health services, trauma centers, after school programs, school art programs. And in the words of Ella Baker, we who believe in freedom cannot rest. There is still work to be done. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Stefan. That was beautiful. Alicia, would you like to go next?
Yes, and I just want to say thank you, Stefan, for your work. I was at the Logan Square protest. I also experienced the cuddling of the last few protests, or the end of the protests. There were less people. They waited us out. They waited to make us confused. And I appreciate all of your work in bringing us together on that day. And I am also deeply saddened and not surprised that the police came in to inflict violence on what was supposed to be a day of healing and mourning and coming together. So yes, thank you. To introduce myself, my name is Alicia Hurtado. I use they, she pronouns. I am a student organizer for Care Not Cops on UChicago's campus. Just to give some context of the work that Care Not Cops does and our current demands, we demand that the University of Chicago disarm, defund, disclose all of the budgetary information regarding safety and security on our campus, and ultimately disband the University of Chicago Police Department, one of the largest private police forces in the country. Though that doesn't matter because we know police of any size, of any scale, inflict violence and harm on our communities. I want to say and also uplift that my analysis, my entry point into this organizing work is not individual whatsoever. All of my words, all of my ideas, all of my understandings come from the experiences of my community, as well as the experiences of the people who do the work around me. And I'm always grateful for the organizing spaces that I have been able to inhabit. I want to first call out the connection between policing on our campus at UChicago to policing in our city, in our country, and the militarized violence that happens all around the world, specifically inflicted by the US military, among other forms of militarized violence. The same cops that killed Adam Toledo, that killed Daunte Wright, that killed Micaiah Bryant, they're the cops that are in our K through 12 schools as RSOs. They're the cops that are in our communities and brutalizing people and surveilling and intimidating folks on a daily basis. And they're also the cops that show up on our university campuses to surveil and protect the boundary between our ivory tower institutions and the communities outside of them, or specifically between white money and property and people. And I think that that connection is important because white supremacy wants us to believe that all of our struggles are either individualized, or if they can't achieve that, to think that all of our struggles are separated. And I think that it's important to attend to the nuances and needs of each community, but understand that the underlying issues in all of these cases of violence are not with any individual person, with any individual community. It's with these systems and structures of violence that people have been speaking out, organizing against, and combating for generations. And I think something that I have turned to a lot over the past 2 weeks, and even beyond that, I think this has been a time of intense mourning, of not even being sure where to go, who to turn to. And I think that my organizing community has served a lot of that purpose for me in terms of giving me the care and space to process, but also the hope that I see that there are people all around me, whether it's on my campus, in my context, abolishing our private police force, groups around the city, groups around the country that feel as strongly and as urgently as I do about this issue. I think something that I would want to uplift from what Stefan said is abolition as an urgent praxis, something that we understand is a horizon goal. We understand that we have a lot of work to do to get there, but every day that police are in our communities is a day of violence. And so we have to look at this as something urgent, something that we must get done. I think the last thing that I will say is a note on diversity and inclusion, just because it's something that our campus loves to say, to put out, to say that they're not being racist, whatever. You may know, you may not know, depending if you're connected to the university's email list. Our provost, Kaili, put out an email actually advertising this panel, which, let me tell you, the Care Not Cops people I'm in contact with were like, what is going on? What is this? But ultimately, it's not surprising that the university wants to uplift the work that's being done by specifically Black faculty, grad students, staff members on our campus, especially work like this that is discursive, that we're having conversations about these issues, because if there's one thing that UChicago loves, it is discourse. Because we know that discourse doesn't have to lead to action, but this discourse has to lead to action. And I just want to say, this is maybe my own personal beef, but I stood outside, slept outside, built community outside of Kaili's house for 7 days last summer. And me and the hundreds of other people that were there urged her to take a public meeting with us, to sit down with us and talk about the violence that the university is enacting on our community, on students of color on our campus, and on the campus-wide boundary that doesn't even really exist, but that is policed by UCPD. I was out there for 7 days. My comrades were out there for 7 days. The community was out there for 7 days. She saw police kettle us. She saw police tearing down what we had built. She saw state violence right outside her doorstep, and she did nothing. And that's not to say that she is the problem. The university knows that they inflict violence. UCPD shot a Black student experiencing a mental health crisis in 2018, Charles Soji Thomas. He received nothing from that experience. He received no care, no support for him or his family. What he did receive was criminalization. He was in Cook County during the beginning of the pandemic in danger because the university would not own the harm that they inflicted on this individual and on multiple people beyond this individual case. So I do want to say, it's really rich to hear Kaili, administrators, the University of Chicago talk about justice, but we need to hold our institutions accountable and hold them accountable not just through talking about these issues. We need to hold them accountable by making actionable and threatening the power that they do have. So that is my piece. I'm sure I will talk more about this because I have so much to say, but thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Alicia. Jax, would you like to share some comments, please?
So hello, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Hamilton. I'm lovingly referred to as Jax at Chicago Freedom School, where I am the Director of Wellness, Culture, and Action, and have been working with Black and Brown young people in the city of Chicago for now 9 years. I'm a proud Chicago daughter from the West Side. And in my role, I like to think of, or I like to explain my work as helping us figure out how we live our politics. Because we can talk about abolition and talk about abolitionist principles, but what does it mean to become well practiced as an abolitionist? What does it mean to become well practiced in social justice? What does it mean to become well practiced in any of these values that we name? And I've learned a lot as an adult in a space that prioritizes young people and youth leadership, a lot of what I learn is how to listen better. And that is a thing that I want to offer up to people who are adults who want to figure out how to be better allies and accomplices for young people, is learning how to listen, learning how to become more well-practiced themselves. There's a thing about becoming an adult and seeing young people come into their own, seeing young people raise their voices, even when you have encouraged it, that can be incredibly scary. Last summer, we saw people essentially speaking about their fear, right? Their fear of young folks breaking windows or young folks being out in the streets or what have you. And what I would say for adults is it can be incredibly uncomfortable. It's hard. It's hard. It's scary. I have those experiences myself when I'm standing out there with young folks, like, okay, maybe I need to fall back. It is important for young people to be able to lift their voices, right? The things that we encourage young people to do, we have to allow them the space to practice that. And it's not going to look the way that you think it will look. It may not feel the way that you think it will feel because you didn't factor in your own fear, right? So some of it is like listening to your own fear, listening to your own hesitations, remembering that you don't know what it is to be a young person right now, right? I feel young and fresh, right? But I'm very grown. So the reality is I don't know what it means to be a 19-year-old right now, a 19-year-old in Chicago during a pandemic, during an uprising, watching yet another young Black person, young brown person be gunned down by the police. I don't know what it feels to have this be my first heartbreak. My heart was broken years and years ago, right? I think that's also really important. We need to reframe these discussions. We need to be talking about the gravity of heartbreak, because that is what's happening. When is the first time you, as a Black or brown person, realize, oh, me too, they would kill me too. Oh, me too, they mean me too, right? And I think that when we're having these conversations about abolition, when we're having these conversations about organizing and activism, we have to also come back to the realities that we're having multiple conversations. We're having conversations about heartbreak. We teach young people about consent. We teach young people about boundaries and raising your voice against oppressive structures and oppressive systems are ways to practice consent, are ways to lay down and enforce boundaries, right? These are the things that we encourage young people to become well practiced in. So we have to create environments and create opportunities for us to witness what that looks like for young people who are in these moments, right? And this is not new, right? We know because we've been told over and over and over again. I really appreciate Stefan bringing in, the names of folks who already told us, right? Audre Lorde told us, your silence is not going to protect you, right? Zora Neale Hurston told us, if you stay silent, they will torture you and say that you enjoyed it, right? So this is not new. This is not something we don't know. This is something we are being told over and over again. And these are realities that unfortunately our young people are coming into. Luckily, beneficially, heartbreakingly, they have the benefit of all the things that we have learned. They have the benefit of all the training that we have. And it is our duty as adults to make sure that we help young folks, that we help young folks by giving them insight on the things that we already know, right? That we help young folks by actually learning how to listen to young folks, right? That we help young folks by recognizing that your ideas may be amazing, they may be great, right? But it's young people who are more tuned into what is most appropriate for this moment, and what's most appropriate for the ways that they want and need to resist. I think that I think, again, when we are thinking about what it means to be here, what it means to live these politics, it's reminding ourselves again that it's practice. There are things that we are more well practiced in. But in order to become well practiced, you have to practice at all. So it means also trusting folks to make mistakes and being there to support them as they learn how to unpack, make amends, and create accountability. Right? It means standing up and defending young people when we see white man after white man, white boy after white boy with automatic weapons walk away from murdering people, defending the young brown boy who threw a gun down behind, behind a fence and came out with his arms up. Right? It's defending the young black girl who had a knife. It's defending. So it's defending young black people and young black and brown people and making sure that they have the same likelihood of being able to walk away that everyone else does, right? It's not necessarily having to demonize folks for not being the perfect victim. It's being clear about the fact that no matter what their conditions are, they are being victimized, right? It's recognizing, as Alicia talked, as Alicia added, right? These same forces are in our school systems. It is also in the ways that we engage with young people, right? The difference between what it means to the difference between what discipline actually is and what punishment is, right? Discipline is a thing that helps you get up and brush your teeth in the morning. It's not the thing that you use to beat a person or to make them conform, right? So it's about engaging critically in these discussions, but also figuring out how to practice critically as well. And lastly, I just want to add again that when we are thinking about what it means to become well practiced or to be well practiced, people love to talk about Dr. King and Dr. King's message of love. And I want to lift that up. I also want to lift up that Dr. King talked about love as a practice. You're gonna love me in policy, right? You're gonna love me in the ways that you practice. You're gonna love me in the ways that you support me. You can love me by pouring money into our schools instead of into the police. You can love me by pouring money into mental health facilities during the pandemic instead of pouring them into police. You can love me in real and practical ways, and it doesn't have to be, it can absolutely be flowery and beautiful, but it is as flowery and beautiful to make sure that you put your money, your support, your energy behind things that can be actionable in creating the lives and the society that we want. And that, I think, is a way that adults can show up as well for young folks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jax. Trina?
Yes, I have so many feelings right now, especially I'm just so grateful for how every single person who has spoken so far has touched on like all of the things that I also feel, right? On top of the work that some of this like, looking at the like accountability models, right, that currently exist through my Invisible Institute job. And so thank y'all for prepping that space, because I think it really provides access to, this conversation around like, like police accountability. And, even before I dive into police accountability, I do want to name, especially because Jack's already started going in on this, but that like, people who have not even had a negative encounter with police are still negatively impacted by the institution of police, right? When you are, I think about this often, like even as a survivor of domestic violence, right? Like I remember, me being like, oh my gosh, like I want this to stop, right? I just want this to stop. I need him to chill and I need me to be safe. And, the only option being police, right? Which is a whole other, entering a whole other thing, right? And then I think to like, even after, an event where like domestic violence had occurred and I had like gotten that space, there is no place to really go, right, in order to process and talk through the thing maybe that you have just experienced. Because honestly, the only person, the way that the system is set up is that you're supposed to call police and let them know about that, right? And so in many cases where we're experiencing crises, right, many cases, for example, when there are gender-based violence and sexual violations happening, where there is a mental wellness crisis like going down, cases where, I don't know, even you're having an altercation with somebody who lives in the building where you currently live, right? Police are only positioned, or the way policing works and police work is that police are positioned to come, and they're like, we could do something when a law is broken, but we can't do anything to prevent the violence from actually happening. We just come when the violence actually happens. I don't know, you're gonna have to call somebody else to try to mediate y'all's conflict, right? And so when these kinds of, money and resources are poured into policing instead of into some of these other models that are not only rooted in like trauma-informed care, but also actually, support the survivor to gain access to resources that they need, right? Like when we're investing in police, we're not investing in that other thing because we know resources are scarce, right? And the decision to put 40% of our corporate budget into the Chicago Police Department on top, and then, lots of our COVID relief money into the Chicago Police Department, when we know that there are young people who are hungry right now. There are people who are in Cook County Jail experiencing human rights violations right now. There are women who have been sexually assaulted by police and are repeatedly sexually assaulted by police right now because nobody is checking, right? Nobody is like actually acknowledging complaints filed against police. And now that'll lead me to my Invisible Institute stuff, because, when I came to the Invisible Institute, I came as like coming out of BYP 100. I was like, I'm an organized, CPDP, we're going to share it with the world. And like, as I'm talking through it, and I'm thinking about how all of these stories, right, so CPDP houses complaints filed against police. Right now it goes back to 1988. We're in the middle of an update, but if you were to go on CPDP right now and you could like click on your neighborhood and you can see like what officers have been complained against within your neighborhood, you might be able to see documents attached to those complaints. But what I learned from, working at the Invisible Institute is that the accountability process does not work, and it's not built to work either, right? It's like, one would think if I have a negative encounter with the police, even if it's random, I'm driving down the street, a police officer like yell at me out the window and call me, all type of nasty words, and I were to go file my complaint, if I don't have any evidence of what happened, they will say that it didn't happen. It will be unfounded, right? And even if there are 10 other Trinas who filed a complaint against Officer Joe, saying, Officer Joe, he cussed me out. I was just driving, minding my business. Officer Joe cussed me out, da-da-da-da-da. They're not, because they're only paying attention to complaints that were sustained. And for a complaint to be sustained, it has to go through this whole other process that's like deeply invasive for the survivors. And, is not, again, another one of those scenarios where you're basically not being treated or you're not speaking to someone who has trauma-informed care, right? Or who has care in mind. You're speaking to someone who has a bias. And so I've seen within the complaint data, a case where, if a person is trying to file a missing persons report for their child, and then the complaint is, I try to file a complaint, and the officer told me, I don't think you give a fuck about your daughter, right? So how many times, right, how many officers are positioned where they are able to gatekeep justice or gatekeep reporting information about things that have happened to folks, right? And we know that if you are already, you have a warrant out for your arrest or whatever that means, and you maybe have a missing person who was in your, somebody who was missing that you want to report, you may think twice about going to file that missing persons report. in fear of being criminalized, right? So the way that the system is set up, even, the accountability system, it's just ridiculous. For years, since the beginning of them having an accountability system, which was the Officer Professional Standard in 1973 or 1974, in the 1970s, all the way to COPA today, right? And it's important that we recognize that their accountability measures are relatively new and they have literally never worked. And each of these boards have basically been told that they have to change their name or like reinvent themselves because of one scandal to the next, right? And so I'm gonna end it at like this thinking about young people and the power of young people and young people listening to young people, which is so important, not accidentally policing young people because you are projecting what someone put onto you is so important, right? A lot of young people they see police quite a bit, maybe even by way of what their family is going through. So even if they have not called police, they might have family members who are impacted by, right, this. They might have had raids on their house, right? I have a young person in my life. She remembers when she thought that somebody was robbing her home. In fact, it was the police, raiding her grandma's house, right? And like, or even when thinking about these other things, right? Like young people who are in abusive relationships right now, like the only thing that they, you can go to your college counselor your high school counselor if you have one, or your social worker who is spread thin if you have one, or you could call the police, right? And so for me, when I think about, the policies or how we think moving forward about these things, I think that there are a lot of cases where we just simply need to remove police from the equation. I'm always thinking abolition, but I recognize that there are steps that it takes to get there. And so when thinking about policy in order to stop, racial profiling or to stop murdering, the murders or the sexual violations that are happening at the hands of police, we need to think about how, who we're putting in front of community members and how we are giving community members resources and making community members and young people feel empowered to tap in. Because in the education system right now, kids can't even come out, young people can't even come outside and do like mutual aid food work through their school because it's a liability. Right. And so when we're living, because even our education system has policing wrapped up in it. And it stunts, right, the growth of young people, because there are folks who often think, well, like, oh, we need to just have them Y equals MX plus B. We don't need to have them serving their community. And that's, we're not valuing those things. And so we're not valuing circumstances where young people are we're not feeding young people, building community with each other, young people communicating and like empowering each other, holding each other accountable. I think that's like even more powerful than like a better police officer like outside, looking for folks. That's my piece. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trina, and each of you. One thing that just on what Trina, what you were saying about accountability, and also just the general conversation we were also having about an expanded vision of young people and for young people. Much of what your comments made me think about, and my own reflections as of late have touched on, is this question of justice. Literally when the Derek Chauvin verdict was announced yesterday, I was in the middle of a class that I helped to teach on incarceration and imagining justice. And we listened to the verdict and we, being read aloud, and we sort of reflected as a whole class on, how we were thinking about, a guilty verdict for a police officer for the murder of a Black individual. And one of the things that was echoed through the class, which I think goes back to sort of the onslaught of images and of incidents and of tragedies, was that we were feeling numb, right? That we had sort of this sense of numbness in the wake of sort of this unremitting police violence against brown and Black young people in particular. And yet on the news, we hear this continual refrain, at least I've heard it, of, justice was served, or that this is what accountability looks like, right? And so just picking up on where we left off and where Trina left us up with, as I'm wondering, I wanted to ask you, the panelists, about your own thoughts on what is and is not justice, what is and is not justice, and how our movements and the broader society should be thinking about what justice and accountability mean in the wake of police killings. And so just anyone who has any thoughts on that, or wants to push back or reframe my question, I really am excited to hear from you about this, and it'll be helpful for me also.
I'm gonna say something really quick because this is really it's always helpful for me to think about it. It's like, for me, justice is like, are we making sure that this will not happen again, right? And so I see a lot of times people are like, well, Black on Black crime, or like, what was he doing out there in the first place? I'm like, okay, yes, like this is a problem too, but like these are problems, and like abolition is a part of that solution. And it's just like, how can we make sure that, like, one, right, the officer, in my personal opinion, he made the decision to shoot Adam before he even saw Adam, because like it was almost like his knee jerk, as soon as he saw him, even though his hands were up, he pulled the trigger, which I think there is like some science behind that, around like when you make the decision to pull the trigger, and that's the whole split-second conversation, right? But then there's the like, what kind of conversations are we having about our community needs, right? Like, what did Adam's mother, what kind of support did his mother need? What were they going through? He was out late at night. Sometimes, young people sneak out. I remember sneaking out when I was a young person, right? That doesn't mean that I was doing anything that was nothing, nothing deserves to be killed, right? But like, there are conversations we can have about at the same time, right? One, holding like this discussion around police and policing, and two, holding this, how can we support families? How can we support, children, right? Who are maybe being recruited, because that's a thing, it happens, right? So that, so how can we make sure this never happens again? And jail doesn't make sure things don't happen again. Jail simply throws fire on the flame. Throws fluid on the flame, flame it. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. It feeds the fire. And often people are even further, violated there and treated like second-class citizens when they get out. So.
To echo off of that, because I was also going to talk in the context of Adam Toledo, but I really resonated with what you said, that they're always going to find a way to victimize him. Like, why was he out this late? Why was he hanging out with a 21-year-old? Why did he have a gun? Why this? Why that? Right? It didn't matter if he had a gun. It didn't matter if his hands were raised. And I want to preface by saying that prison is not justice. Prison is not justice. And it's not accountability. It is simply removing this person and subjecting them to structures that have continuously harmed Black and Brown communities specifically, right? And I think, yes, getting rid of police is one thing, but we need to remove that money that police has, that billions of dollars that the Chicago police get, and we need to reinvest them into communities as well, right? There's many schools here that have art programs. There are many schools here whose teachers are spread very thin. Adam Toledo's mother is a single mother. I'm sure she had to work, I don't know how many jobs. The Little Village community has a high rate of undocumented folks here who are essential workers, who have had to continuously work through the pandemic. My neighbor actually passed away because of COVID. He was a factory worker. He was a single father who left his daughter, because this is a community that is highly impacted by the lack of resources we have, but somehow we have a police officer on every corner, right? So there are so many factors that led to the murder of Adam Toledo. And one of the direct ones is that there are too many police officers here, and one police officer is way too many, and not enough resources coming into our communities.
I think I'll build off of that point too. This idea that prison is not justice. I think something I've been thinking about a lot, and even continuing this vein of diversity and inclusion, what does it mean to expand prison to include the people that it has excluded in the past, these populations that have been above the law, or whatever, however we want to phrase that. And I think something I've been trying to parse through is the difference between justice and equity. When we think about this system is equitable, I can punish you just as much as I punish you. We're not necessarily questioning, is punishment the way that we want to think about justice? Because I think when we think through prison, or thinking through a guilty verdict as some sort of serving of justice, we are making a lot of assumptions when we do that. And one of those assumptions is that through punishment, through revenge, that is what is going to heal or somehow address this harm that has been created. And I think that, to Trina's point, when we think about punitive consequences, I can never say that word right, punitive consequences, as something that allows us to address harm, it takes us away from listening to the people, the survivors of violence, and listening to the survivors of violence, listening to the people that this violence affects, but also thinking about how can we do better for our communities? How can we show up in it better for one another? And how can we think about these larger structures of violence that are impacting us and not able to be convicted? No individual can be convicted for police as a structure being violent. That is just institutions are collectives of people, but we can't say we're going to give you a guilty verdict because you're inflicting violence in our communities by getting money for policing and surveillance instead of art programs, instead of school funding, instead of X, Y, and Z necessities that our communities need to thrive and grow. And I think this is just a last point, I think we were talking a little bit about the ways that we police each other. And I know that it was more in the context of with young people, but I think it honestly can be extended to just the ways that we interpersonally are in community and show up for one another. There is something that I have been thinking about, which is the phrase, kill the cop in your head. I don't know if people are aware, but a couple of weeks ago, we had a COVID outbreak because of a super spreader frat party on our campus. And something that happened immediately after was people calling for a myriad of different punishments, like, oh, these people need to be punished. These people need to see the consequences of their action. But I think there were like some things that weren't being talked about, like, how do we tell community members about this potential danger? Why do these people feel like they didn't have community on campus and needed to throw a party to find that community on campus, or to find that? Like, what supports are missing right now? Can we give people COVID safety kits? What can we do to actually address this, rather than take these people pre-registration away or whatever and target these individuals, where it's a much larger issue than just that. And I feel like that may seem like a very small or inconsequential example. It's one school, it's one group of people, but I think that mindset, where when someone commits harm to a community, to another person, it's easy to go to the punitive route because that's what we know, and that's what the current status quo tells us that we should be seeking. But in reality, I think when we think through transformative justice, it's not necessarily going easy on someone. It's not taking the easy way out. It's not letting them off easy in any way. It's just reframing the way that we collectively take responsibility for taking care of one another and being invested in the well-being of one another, rather than like, you're the bad person. Maybe from that moment, instead, we think, how can we address this harm, and try and think, how can we not have this happen again?
I want to go back to something that Trina said when they were talking about, people sort of reporting, right? In this conversation about what is justice, immediately I think about, what does it feel like? We know what it feels like. We have to figure out how to give it voice, give it name. And the first thing that stuck out for me is, we are reliable sources, right? When we start to listen to and give credit to our own realities, because a part of that police in your head piece, right, is we tell ourselves that we are not credible sources as well. right? So I think in the vein of like recognizing that this is a step-by-step process, it is recognizing one of the first steps is learning how to listen to yourself, learning how to actually acknowledge your own credibility, acknowledge the credibility of your communities, right? And ask yourself the question, you know, that Alicia had us asking, right? Am I being the police right now? Or how am I being the police right now? Because the reality is it's so impressed upon us that we should be policing ourselves and policing each other, right? That it becomes a part of one of your first reactions. So how am I being the police right now in this moment, right? How am I policing the way that I'm experiencing a thing? When you talk yourself out of, well, maybe they didn't. I mean, I know it didn't feel, I know it was violent, but maybe it wasn't that bad. I know, you know, I could have or should have done X, Y, and Z. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have been out that late at night when it's your right to be out when you want to be out, right? Maybe I shouldn't have said it with that. I should have used different intonation. Maybe I should have used different words. Maybe I should have held my body differently. Maybe I should have X, Y, or Z, right? I think some of it is acknowledging the ways that we discredit our own selves and by extension discredit other people who look like us, who live like us, who experience the world like we do, right? And I think also Stefan made a really important point about there are so many different factors at the same time, right? Abolition is not just about policing, right? Abolition is housing. Abolition is making sure that people are making a living wage. Abolition is making sure that during a pandemic, people are taken care of, right? So that they are not having to risk their lives, the lives of their communities, the lives of the people around them, the lives of the people they love, and risk the livelihood that of everyone in their vicinity in order to survive. We're not talking about thriving. We're just talking about barely surviving, right? So I think when we think about abolition, we have to also recognize that it's a part of interconnected struggles. And when we think about that interconnectedness, we have to challenge that police officer in our head. Well, you just need to work hard enough. Actually, let me get another job. If I was working a little bit harder, then maybe I wouldn't be, right? That's the way that we discredit ourselves. That's that thing in us that's been ingrained in us, right? A thing that's foreign from us, because when we feel it in our bodies, we have physical rejection to it, right? It's a thing that makes us feel bad because it's not true, right? It's a lie, the ways that we discredit ourselves. It's a lie, the ways that we police ourselves, right? It's a lie, the ways that we deny ourselves basic human dignity and human rights, right? So I think when I'm thinking about what justice is about starting with that first step so that we can get to the next step. The first step is just recognizing that I am a reliable source. I can listen to the voice in my head, that the person who I'm looking at, who lives next door to me, is a reliable source as well, that I can trust and believe in them, right? That the person who lives down the block as well, because when we recognize that we are reliable, that we create data, right? We are living the data for that, for these experiences, then we can begin to start to envision what else is possible. What is the difference in the world that we are living in the world that we want to live in, and start to create a vision for more just systems.
Thank you all so much for sharing. It's wonderful to listen. And just to pick up a little bit on what Jax was saying, I want to take a moment you know, we know that police don't prevent violence. We know that part of the over reliance on police is a state failure to provide for communities. And one thing I'm really inspired by all of you and all of your work in your organizations is the way that movement orgs, as well as communities, build autonomous spaces, build life affirming spaces and institutions to get their needs met. So I want to hear from each of you, if you would, kind of what are the life affirming spaces you've worked on, built in, been a part of in your movement spaces, and what are the life affirming spaces, institutions that are in communities that you think need more investment, need more support, need to be scaled so that everyone kind of has access to places to turn instead of police. When they're experiencing violence, when they're experiencing hunger, when they need to be a part of a community. What's some of that work that you've seen or been a part of?
I can go, I can start. So I'm thinking about, like, the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about, like, when responding to your question is a thing that, like, me and 3 other Black folks from the South Side of Chicago created, called the People's Grab and Go. It's like a mutual aid effort every week last summer from the beginning of June, or whatever the day was that Lori Lightfoot said that people would not have lunches, food, CPS students wouldn't have food, all the way to the end of August. It was like Black led. Black folks were the ones passing groceries to, Black folks were the ones taking groceries to people's cars, sometimes walking people to their house because they were so close by. And I think about a lot of other, like, Black, like, direct service even programs that I feel like people have pushed to the wayside because there are other people who are, like, doing the buzzword thing where they're like, because even some folks who are saying, like, abolition, like, are they working with community members? Like, are they in relationship with community members, and are they actively building those relationships? Like, what are they doing to teach and, like, learn from the communities who are impacted by these things? Like, how are they, are they not, I'm saying, like, are they policing people, right? When receiving goods, they're like, oh, you have to bring your kids or whatever. Like, that's these are some of the, like, problematic barriers to entry that some folks have. But, the Grab and Go no longer exists, but 360 Nation, an organization out West, is, like, so powerful, like, community organization working with young people on land, working with young people on mutual aid, working with young people to, like, learn how to grow food and, like, share with their communities. But then I also think about Let Us Breathe, who's doing, like, similar work. They have programming, they have relationship with people who are in that community. And yeah, when I'm like, I think that, like, it's really challenging to think about, like, it's like all these institutions are so full of, like, bureaucracy, and sometimes, like, there are only pockets of time where the right leadership is, like, up in there making decisions, and then, like, who knows, 5 years later they might not be there. So I think, even as these organizations change, like, if you are thinking about supporting, and you can name this directly, like, are you all working with, is this a community-led organization? Like, is there a white person leading your organization? Like, what is your hierarchical system? How do y'all do hierarchies here, right? Does the one white man make decisions and then, like, put a token, like, Black person in the front, what I'm saying? Or, like, are we talking about transformative spaces where everyone is respected and valued and empowered? Yeah.
I was just trying to, like, get my thoughts together, but thank you, Trina, because I feel like you provided, like, some good places for me to go off of. The first thing I will say, like, directly jumping off what you just said, I think student organizing as a container is in some ways unique because we're kind of, everyone lives on campus, we're all, like, within the same space, but also I mean, maybe not even it's different, but I'm just thinking about the institution that we're targeting is the one who is giving us this, like, they're like supposed to be giving us stuff or whatever. And so people are like, you're ungrateful for doing all of this work. But I think about the ways that the student organizing community on my campus is a lot of the reason why I have a community on campus, why I feel like I'm supported on campus, not necessarily the ways in which the university has interfaced with me, and the people who I love and have been able to form connections with. So I wanted to say one thing that U Chicago United, which is like the larger org that my campaign is a part of, is doing in terms of thinking about abolition both as taking resources from surveillance, but putting resources into where we need them in our communities, and conceptualizing a community not just on our campus, because we know that U Chicago profits off of this idea of an isolated ivory tower institution that's elite, that only certain people are connected to, and distance themselves from the people who are in need in our communities. But anyway, I digress. I think one really amazing thing that we have just started doing this past year was U Chicago Mutual Aid, or UC United Mutual Aid rather. People table at Jewel Osco every other Saturday, make connections with people. When it was raining one week, they texted all the people who had come by the table, asked if they needed anything, did drop-offs at houses. And I think it's just, that is one example of a space that we've been able to build. But I also think the other campaigns, I'd like to uplift those that are working on our campus. One is for a student and community-led ethnic studies department. And then the other is for student community-led cultural centers, spaces where people can gather, people can use these facilities to create community on, and whether you're campus affiliated or not. And then thinking about ethnic studies as making the history of I want to say our people, but the history of marginalized people ingrained into the work that we're doing, A, and B, also something that isn't necessarily contained into the university. Those are also spaces that I see love, and I see ability to create community within our struggle. And then the last thing, I think I touched a little bit on this in terms of talking about the community I have found through just us putting our ideas of care and our ideas of being there for one another, which I think are like connected to a larger abolitionist lens in practice in our own organizing work and in our relationships with one another. But I also want to call to what Trina was saying in the fact that for student organizing, we are only here for 4 years. Maybe if we're grad students, we're here for longer, but that turnover is something that happens on an even shorter scale. So when you say like, in 5 years, maybe the same people won't be like the people who are driving this org, for student organizing, that happens on a very short scale. So I think that has given me the perspective of why we institute circular leadership in our movements, to make sure that everybody has a chance to have a voice and have a seat at the table, even though I don't really know why I said that, because I feel like seat at the table has so many things attached to it. But basically that our campaign and our heart is not just one person. That serves two functions. One, there's no singular voice for this movement, and there shouldn't be. But two, it allows us to build up people's skills, build up people's confidence, and make sure that people know that they have the answers, like what Jax was saying, that they are able to say their story, to have the knowledge that we need to communicate the struggle. So yeah, I think all of those things that you said, Trina, I really appreciate. And that is the end of my piece. Sorry if I rambled a little bit.
I feel like the original question was like something, I don't know, the word that stuck out to me was autonomous, and how these movements can be autonomous. And I feel like I've been struggling with that since last summer, when a lot of folks it was starting to become really hot in Chicago with movements and actions and marches and rallies. And there was a lot of safety for individuals in mind. And so folks would find safety and be like, oh, Good Kids Mad City is organizing this, or, BYP 100 is organizing this, right? And so I've continuously had to have conversations with organizers, and be like, things can be organic, people can be autonomous, there doesn't have to be an organization attached to it. And I feel like that's led to a lot of the work that's happening right now. I've met a group of people that we've been working in the past 2 weeks, and because of our collective like ties to our own individual organizations, we've been able to pull off quite a few big actions, quite a few big things. But we don't have a name right now. I feel like that's coming. When it comes out, we'll let you all know. But it is a lot of people, femmes, Latinx folks, queer, trans folks from the Little Village community, and sort of being autonomous from our own organizations. That all of them aren't necessarily located in Little Village, but sort of counting on and relying on those resources that we have in our communities outside of Little Village to create these steps. We're actually having a meeting today to be like, what can we do next? But that'll be later on. But yeah, I'm becoming more comfortable with the word autonomous, and realizing that things can be autonomous and organic and safe, and and that's just something that I've had to learn as an organizer.
So the thing that stuck out for me was the piece about life affirming community spaces. And, you know, I absolutely agree with Stefan that it is important for folks to figure out how to create autonomous spaces. I agree that oftentimes, some of the most powerful work is done by folks whose names most people in the city will never know, because they're working in their community. They have, put together measures of support for their block even, right? So I think that some of the work is figuring out how to locate those folks block by block, right? Or figuring out how to lift up, the person who out of their own pocket is doing work, who out of their garage, or what have you, a group of neighborhood members. That happens a lot. I think the thing that we need to continuously lift up is that we take care of each other, right? We do a really good job of taking care of each other, especially considering the complete lack of resources, right, that we experience. We continuously take care of one another, right? I just saw We Keep Us Safe, right? We do. We keep us safe. And I think that some of that is like, you can start on your block even with that. Trying to figure that out. I think also it's important for us to recognize how important it is to have a political home, spaces and places where you can struggle with the ideas. I think it can be really difficult, really intimidating, and sometimes really problematic for folks who walk into spaces and it seems like everybody has the language. We're talking about epistemologies and, or whatever, right? When the reality is people start using that language, but there are real ways to have these conversations that make sense for the lives that we live, right? I know that we're on an academic platform and we want to encourage that, right? But we also want to make sure that these theories can become practice, right? So that it's not just this like heady idea space, but so that we can actually figure out how these things will live in the real world. So I want to encourage folks to figure out what it means to either join a space with people that you trust, where you can say all the things the wrong way and you don't feel like you're going to be thrown away, right? But they will give you enough space, enough time, and challenge you enough or invite you to come into a knowing and understanding of what it means to do this, right? Because nobody who believes any of these things, nobody who calls himself an abolitionist got there by just automatically saying, I'm an abolitionist. There are some difficult things to struggle with, right? Do I want the police underneath the jail after they shoot a Black person? That's a hard one when I'm also saying that I believe in abolition of prisons, right? And it's important for us to be in community and figure out how to have conversations like that. that are hard, that are difficult, that are messy. And I want to, shout out some places in case folks don't know, right? So automatically, I'm going to start out with Chicago Freedom School. If there are young folks out here or people who are wanting to be allies and accomplices to young Black and Brown people, come through. We always have something that needs to be done. Your work might be lifting something that is heavy, or it might be working with us to unpack some of these ideas, because these are the things that we talk about with young folks. And it's about making sure that the world outside, you might have to experience the world outside in a particular kind of way. But when we are thinking about creating life-affirming community spaces, we're thinking about in here, what is possible, so that we can practice in here, we can stumble through it in here, we can grow in here, and then you can start figuring out what it means to do that inch by inch, little by little, in your neighborhood, in your community, in your family, right? So Chicago Freedom School is always a place where we are, looking for a welcoming of, support, resources, good vibes, all of it, especially from other folks of color. UMedics, I'm automatically going to shout out UMedics. I feel like the life affirming piece for UMedics for me is built on a premise that says that my death is not a foregone conclusion. Experiencing violence does not automatically mean that I have to die as a result of it, right? And it means that we can activate ourselves in order to try to save our lives and save the lives of those who are around us. I want to lift up Brave Space Alliance, who is out here doing the work for queer and trans folks around the city, primarily, especially for queer and trans Black and Brown folks in the city. Again, saying life affirming, I deserve to live and I deserve to be here, and we're going to make sure that we have what we need in order to do that. I want to lift up YEP, the Youth Empowerment Performance Project, right? Another space for trans young folks of color, right? Where it's also, I deserve to be here, but I deserve to also be able to give voice to my story. And I deserve to also have time and space to dream up what is possible for me and my people, right? Assata's Daughters, another powerful group of young Black people, right? Young Black women, young Black people who are out here organizing, and they start young too, right? So that's also really beautiful. And I know that they're often, looking for support as well. Village Leadership Academy. I think sometimes we don't remember or think about the fact that that schools can be places of transformation, and they can be places of liberation because we're so used to them being places of oppression. So I want to lift up VLA as a space that encourages young folks to, as a part of their curriculum, right, to be thinking about and planning for and training themselves for their own liberation. And I want to lift up Black Rising. I want to lift up Good Kids Mass City, right? I want to lift up collectives of young folks who are out here organizing, take it to the streets. I want to lift up BYP, right? And I could keep going because we are so full, especially in this city. We are so full of people out here doing really, really amazing work, right? 360 I ran into because they were on the streets actually giving people food, doing work. You can find people if you are out here, right? And all it takes is stopping for a minute, saying, who are you, what's going on, right? Engaging. We're in the Midwest, be very Midwestern about it. Hey, how you doing? What's happening here? How can I be down? You need some help? Maybe I can't stay today, but maybe I can figure out a way to come through a little bit later. So that's what I want to offer up, right? These life affirming spaces, the life affirming is actually living a life and being out here and saying, okay, this is what I believe it means to live a life. And this is how I'm going to figure out how to practice that in my everyday life.
Thank you, Jax.
Wait, I forgot to shout out my groups. I just kind of talked a little bit. I'd like to uplift Únete La Villita. On Saturdays, they give out hot meals to community members. They have a revolutionary book club to make this kind of language that we have in academic spaces accessible. What we mean by abolition, they are there to sort of explain to the community what it is. Environmental justice is so important. They just, like last year, they blew up a coal plant that really impacted the respiratory systems of a lot of people in our community. So they're doing a lot of environmental work. I want to uplift her Chicago. They've been there for us. I love them so much. And of course, Chicago Freedom School. So I just wanted to shout that out real quick.
Thank you, Stefan. We want to move a little bit into Q&A here. And there's a good question here by Jose in the chat that I want to uplift. And I also want to add a little bit of one of my own questions to it. But the question says, are there strategies to find common ground between those who are working towards abolishment and those who believe more police is needed? I have found that it's challenging to connect work with both sides. I feel like there's a ton of work that needs to happen between now and a world with no police, but without having all perspectives in the same space, it turns into them versus us. And I want to uplift that because that's the hard work, right? And I want to also kind of add on to that a little bit, in this kind of past year of organizing, how has it been for each of you communicating with members of your own community who might not hold an abolitionist stance, who, even family members or, loved ones who may say, well, to me, or who may kind of equate more violence with a need for more policing or a need for more carceral solutions. How has it been for each of you having to do that work? And how can we answer Jose's question here about finding common ground with folks?
I'm not sure. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So I feel like some of these conversations are organizing conversations. The thing that I always lift up for young folks is you cannot organize a person you do not respect, right? So you have to actually come from a place of respectfulness. And some of that, again, it's figuring out how to listen. I think that oftentimes what people are leaning into is you're leaning into the things that everybody on this panel has already talked about, right? Like the police is what we've been told, right? We've been told since we were very young. If you're in trouble, call the police, right? We see that, with Micaiah. If you're who said, I'm in trouble, let me call the police, right? And we also see that same indoctrination is what helps kill us too. So I think some of it is like respecting what people are, respecting where people are coming from, respecting them enough to hear and listen, and then inviting them into the knowledge that they already have, right? One of a conversation that I had, someone said, well, what if I come up on a dead body, right? If they are already dead, what are the police gonna do? You can call the ambulance. The police might come, right? But that doesn't mean that that's who you need to call first. What if I have, what if I'm having X, Y, and Z situation happen? There are alternatives. And I think some of it is us inviting one another into thinking about, we already use all of these alternatives all the time, right? We already use them, but because we lean into that quick and easy, if you're in trouble, call the police, right? It makes us sometimes forget what we are already engaging. We already know this. We already do these things. So reminding people of the things that we already know, the things that we already do, the ways that we already practice, we already show up for ourselves. Well, who would you call in a neighborhood? Who would you call if the police didn't exist? Because there's somebody to call. So I think some of it is that just reminding one another and respecting one another to listen instead of just cutting people off and saying, oh, well, you're ignorant and I can't be here with you.
I feel like someone else was gonna say something. So I just wanted to raise my hand. Was someone else gonna go first? Okay.
I can go after you. Go ahead.
So I dropped in the chat and I will drop it again, but this is a PDF of like reform versus abolition. And it's like basically, reforms versus abolitionist steps in policing. And I absolutely do believe that there is a way for for abolitionists and reformists to have a discussion. You know, I do think that it's hard, especially when folks are like, you know, especially because I think the conversation can get pretty distracted. And then when we go down the rabbit hole of like, well, these people need to be locked up, like, then I think we're not, you know, we need to bring it back to some of these like basic, simple questions, right? And some of them can be addressed right here in this PDF, if you could check it out, so that you can come to some, you know, that's how those conversations can work. Because, and Angela Davis talks about this too. She's like, you know, you could talk to reformists and like find common ground, and that is also rooted in abolition. And that's a part of the development, right? You're working with people. I mean, my family is, you know, they're not abolitionists. You know, my daddy was born in 1945. He's seen so much, and he has honestly lost a lot of hope. And so, you know, you have to be patient and careful with folks who've experienced trauma. You don't want to be invalidating their lived experience because for the sake of your politic, right? You want to have conversations that are rooted in patience, that are rooted in, you know, understanding, and then finding that place where y'all can groove together and move in that direction.
I just wanted to add, I think I agree with everything that has been said thus far. And I think a time that I came up with against this very recently, right now, I don't know if people are plugged in, there is a national movement, or I guess there has been a national movement, but a national coalition of folks who are organizing abolitionist campaigns on their campuses. There's 60 plus campuses affiliated, and there's going to be all these rolling actions that are happening throughout the month of May. Keep an eye out for you Chicago stuff. But anyway, we are specifically kicking off the month of actions with a May 3rd labor refusal, or day of withholding labor. So that means like not going to class, not teaching class, not opening institutes or centers, that kind of thing. And on our campus and on many other campuses, we have a group of people that are super down. We have our base that we know, and specifically on our campus, Care Not Cops is an undergrad campaign. So we know we're gonna have to talk to people who are outside of our group, or even outside of our like part of campus, in order to get solidarity for this to happen. And we were talking at a meeting, someone was like, I don't know, like the way to do this is to ask department chairs to issue letters of non-retaliation. Like that is how we need, like something that is able to reach people that are not in our movement spaces right now. But the people at the top, obviously they have power. They have less of a likelihood of being like really down with our movement, and with specifically like boosting that to where admin could see that kind of thing. And something we were talking about was, what does it mean for someone, even if they're not at the point of being like, I want to abolish the police, what does it mean for them to be on an abolitionist horizon? Can we talk about defunding the police and allocating resources to our communities? Can we talk about disarming the police so they don't have weapons that can kill our people? And I think that that has been a place where we can talk to people and say, you know what, abolition, there's many things that can go into this. And I think that the PDF that Trina shares says, like, very much outlines that, where we can think about ways that we're moving resources and moving money specifically from policing, and making sure that we don't grow these institutions. And that is a demand, or at least a tactic that I think you don't have to necessarily be an abolitionist to get behind. And just one last thing, I think in the context of this action, but just thinking about how can we make the people that have power right now move? Because I know from my contacts, I'm organizing against university administrators. What moves them? They're moved by profit. They're moved by institutional reputation. And I think that that template can be thought about and strategized by whatever target that you choose. But when we think about those two things, humanity is not one of those things. Caring about the community is not necessarily one of those things, unless we can make it hurt their pockets. And for that to happen, we have to be coordinated and think about how we can build solidarity whether or not someone has the perfect politics, because that doesn't even exist. So I think definitely what Jax and Trina said, I echo that. And also I just think that thinking about the ways that we can, just be moving our energy and our resources in the right direction, like that's exactly it.
I wanted to also bring up a question that was from Facebook that is related to solidarity. And this person asks, how can adults or older adults in different movement spaces be better allies to the work that you're leading without imposing? So I wanted to just sort of bring that up quickly, since I think that's a really important question that I'm sure that each of you can speak on pretty powerfully.
I can jump in. Be quiet. Sit down somewhere sometimes. Figure out what the difference is between mentorship and sort of taking it over. I think that oftentimes, as if you are an organizer and you are an adult and you've been out here and you like are really excited about welcoming young folks and you really believe you know the way, right? It can be easy to forget that, like, even with all of your knowledge, we are still where we are, which means that we may need some new knowledge. So I think some of the work that the adult organizers have to do is unlearning a lot of adultism, a lot of the power dynamics that exist between young folks and adults, and learn how to fall back a little bit, right? It's okay to not be in the center. It's okay to have the waters and be passing the waters out instead of being on the bullhorn. It's okay to step into, again, a mentorship role, recognizing that you might give information, insight, and advice that people don't use, right? That's okay too. And it's okay to make sure that you are creating a space where you're helping people remember how to draw back into their values, right? So I think some of the benefit of having been an organizer for quite some time is being able to look back on and see some of the missteps you made, or see some of the things that you weren't able to see then. Offer them if it's welcome, but if not, be there as a support. But I think also, some of it is like filling in the gaps. Can you carry things? Can you bring things? Can you fund things? Can you connect people? Can you, how can you support what is happening versus it happening exactly the way that you think it should be happening?
I like what you said in the beginning. Be quiet, step back. You have a lot of privilege as an adult. Your car is something that could be really helpful too if adults drive, because I don't drive. And I know a lot of, I'm like, hey, can you go pick this up from here and bring it here? I know that's helped a lot. Or giving young people rides home. I think also using privilege as well to talk about, I didn't get to answer the last question, but it kind of goes back to the last question of like using that privilege of like, how do you explain to your neighbors? They might not want to talk to me. I'm this young person. Especially if I'm talking to someone who's like 60, they probably might not want to talk to me. They might find me patronizing. They might find me a bunch of things, and I might not be the one to have that conversation with them. But adults, older folks can use that privilege that they are older and sort of seen as, wise and seasoned, and using that privilege to sort of connect with community members and, do that work while we're doing this work, right? It's the same work that we're all doing. It's just we all have different roles. So supporting young people in that way.
I am so grateful for what y'all shared. Thank you so much.
It is 4 o'clock, which is the technical end of our panel. I'm so glad for everyone joining us today. Thanks to the CSRPC for hosting and all of our wonderful panelists and the work that you all do in Chicago. I want to end us quickly on a quote from Audre Lorde's Age, Race, Class, and Sex, something that Jax referenced briefly earlier. I want to say, so the old definitions have not served us, nor the earth that supports us. The old patterns, no matter how cleverly rearranged to imitate progress, still condemn us to cosmetically altered repetitions of the same old exchanges, the same old guilt, hatred, recrimination, lamentations, and suspicions. For we have built into all of us old blueprints of expectation and response, old structures of oppression, and these must be altered at the same time as we alter the living conditions which are a result of those structures. For the master's tool will never dismantle the master's house. So I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to David. Thank you to Riley for organizing all of us. And everyone, take care.
Thank you so much.